Hello. Come on in. Hi, how are you?
Would you like a tea or coffee?
I'm the one that takes the coffee before sugar.
I think there's a seat over here. Give me a seat, I'll get the tea or coffee.
Hello everybody, come in, please find a seat.
Come on and get a cuddle and a cuppa.
With all of us together, it'll be chaotically beautiful. Let us all sit and enjoy the brew and blather.
Hello and welcome to A Brew and a Blether, a community-produced podcast funded by the Great Place Scheme and recorded in partnership with Erskine Arts about the lives of women and non-binary people in Renfrewshire. I'm Jules, this is Frankie.
Hello.
We're volunteers at Kairos Women Plus, and in this series we're focusing on women's heritage. By that we mean how women's lives are remembered. In this series we'll be talking about our experiences collaborating with Paisley Museum, poor houses and poverty in Renfrewshire, the legacy of slavery in Scotland, and finally Section 28 LGBTQ+ education and representation.
We wanted to explore some of the more marginalised voices in Renfrewshire's history, so our focus is not just on Women Plus, but on underrepresented groups more generally, working class, BAME and LGBTQ+ folks, and the documented histories we have uncovered, or more often struggle to find. We believe that documenting the lives of marginalised groups now is the key to a more representative history in the future, so we hope this podcast can contribute to a more representative heritage sector in Renfrewshire and beyond. Content warning. This episode contains discussion of homophobia and transphobia in schools, so please be kind to yourself and switch off if you find anything triggering. This episode will explore Section 28 and the impact it had on LGBTQ+ pupils, and also on the teachers who were forced by law to implement it. What is Section 28? Section 28 was a law that was passed by the 1988 Conservative government that stopped councils and schools, quote unquote, promoting the teaching of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. LGBTQ+ campaigners rejected the law and were active in fighting for change, and the law was eventually repealed in Scotland in 2000 and in the rest of the United Kingdom in 2003. We will first hear 5 oral history extracts from people who remember Section 28 and homophobia in their schools. These were collected by OurStory Scotland, a charity that collects, archives and presents the life stories and experiences of the lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender community in Scotland. This involves oral history work with all ages, including the older generation, whose stories reveal the changes that have occurred for LGBTQ+ people in their lifetimes. In addition to collecting stories, images, artefacts and research materials from LGBTQ+ lives, OurStory Scotland presents heritage from the arts, in exhibitions, storytelling and drama. To find out more about our story, visit ourstoryscotland.org.uk.
We will then hear a conversation between Katy Wilson-Scott, Kate Clarke and Nicky Irmrie. Katie's our senior coordinator at Kairos Women Plus and was a lesbian student during the early 2000s. Kate is a Kairos board member, volunteer and was a teacher and head teacher during and after Section 28. Nicky is a volunteer at OurStory Scotland and was an LGBTQ+ teenager in the early 1990s. They will share their perspectives on how the policy affected pupils and silenced LGBTQ+ voices. Lastly, we'll reflect on more recent changes to the Scottish curriculum as part of Time for Inclusive Education policy, including the Sapphic Scots Poem 49 of the Maitland Quarto manuscripts written in the 16th century. This is a shift towards a more representative curriculum and shows the progress we've made in Scottish education since Section 28 was overturned in the year 2000. To read more about the poem and other resources included in the new curriculum, please visit www.tie.scot.
The following 5 extracts come from the OurStory Scotland archive. OurStory Scotland is a charitable organisation in Scotland that collects, archives and shares life stories and extracts from life stories of LGBTQ+ people. And these are 5 episodes that have some connection to school days or Section 28. So the first one is from Pauline. This episode comes from her life when she was about 9 or 10 in 1990. and it was told in 2006. When I was growing up, I always felt drawn towards older girls and women. At first I thought I wanted an older sister, a girl I would be really close to and spend a lot of time with. When I was about 9 or 10, I started a new primary school. Straight away I noticed an older girl working at the school supervising our playtimes. One day I overheard that she was planning on leaving to get another job. I was really sad about this and wanted to get her a present to show how much she meant to me. I'd hardly spoken to her before this. I got money from my mum and bought a box of chocolates. The next day at school after playtime, we all came inside. I grabbed the chocolates from my bag and went running up to her and blurted out, "Hi, I heard you were leaving. I think it's a shame because you're really nice and I think you're really pretty. You're so pretty that if I was a man, I'd like to marry you." I turned round to go into my class and found all of my classmates standing behind me, open-mouthed. I reddened and slowly made my way back to class through the crowd. "What did you say that for?" one asked. "Just 'cause I like her." "You're a lesbian," said one boy. "No, I'm not," I replied, firmly believing everything I said. "I said I wanted to marry her if I was a man, and I'm not a man, and I don't want to be one, so you're wrong." It was another 6 or 7 years before I realised that that boy was actually right, but then that's another story. This is from Andrew, from around about the same time. This is from Dundee in 1991, also told in 2006. The school I attended was brave enough to show a video, the two of us, which had gay and bisexual related theme. This was in the midst of Clause 28. I already knew that I was gay, but I applaud the school for this. And I had my first gay relationship while I was at that school. So we've now got 2 episodes from people who were at the same school at the same time. That's Largs Academy in 2000. This is first of all from Cheryl. As an openly gay person, I faced prejudice in many aspects of my life. I spent the majority of my school life fighting for the right to express myself and be who I am. I was exposed to abuse every school day, from pupils and teachers alike. I faced everything from being spat on to having punches thrown as I walked down the corridors. Fortunately for me, I made it through school with love from a very supportive family and a small group of loving friends. So many people haven't been so lucky. Coming to Pride this year, 2006, has made it even more apparent that these people have all been through the same things. There's a sense of togetherness and understanding in the community that I've found in few other places. After everything we have been through, we can all march and be proud, showing everyone that is intolerant of us that we are not victims. There's a lot to be said for that. And this is Ross, also from Largs Academy. When I turned 17, I decided to come out at school, which is never easy for anyone. No coming out is ever 100% positive or 100% negative experience, but I count myself among the luckier ones. While many people were quietly bitching behind my back, far more came up to me and congratulated me for my courage and supported, and to some extent protected me through the process. By the end of the year, 6 of us had taken the plunge, and my former school has had openly LGBT pupils ever since. Last one. This is from someone called Meek, from high school in 2004. I sent out an email to a friend from my email account at school describing my neo-Nazi guidance teacher who, to say the least, was a cow. After writing this, I went on to write about a boy I was sort of seeing at the time. Up until when I wrote this email, no one had a Scooby-Doo that I was gay. My school sent a copy of the email to my mum, saying that what I wrote about was inappropriate and couldn't be overlooked, regardless of the sensitive nature. My school outed me to my mum, something I hadn't prepared myself for, and led me into a spiral of depression and awkwardness afterwards.
So welcome everybody, I'm Katy Wilson-Scott, I'm the Senior Coordinator of Kairos Women Plus, and I'm here today to talk about Section 28 because in 2001 I started high school in England and Section 28 was still alive and kicking. Kate, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Kate Clarke, pronouns.
Yes.
Pronouns are she, her, and I'm a retired teacher and a volunteer with Kairos, and so I was teaching before and after Section 28.
Nicky, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Nicky Irmrie. I'm also she, her pronouns. I was at school in secondary school from 1989 to 1995, so my teenage years were spent during Section 28, and I'm a friend of Kairos and I've been invited to take part today.
Thank you. I'm just going to introduce myself again because I didn't include my pronouns. So I'm Katy Wilson-Scott. I'm from Kairos Women Plus. I'm the senior coordinator there. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm here today because I was in school during the end of Section 28. I started high school in 2001 and I identify as a lesbian woman, so it was a bit of a tricky time. So we're going to explore that today. We're looking at Section 28 and having a conversation around how it impacted on us as individuals, but also wider society. So Section 28 was a law that was passed in 1988 by the Conservative government that stopped councils and schools promoting the teaching of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. And Margaret Thatcher said, children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay. All of those children are being cheated of a sound start in life. So Section 28 had a huge impact. There was mass protests, huge LGBT campaigns, and it sparked a movement. So I think that there's a lot of wonderful things that came out of Section 28, as always, with any movement. It started usually by something negative. One of the big impacts of Section 28 was that it prevented councils from funding lesbian and gay initiatives. And that was around the time in 1988 when 75% of the population thought that homosexual activity was always or mostly wrong, and that was from the British Social Attitudes Survey. So it tells you a little bit about the climate at the time, but today we're going to explore our perception of Section 28 and the long-term consequences of that policy. So the first question then is, what would you say your connection is to Section 28? And I'm going to come to Kate first.
I was working as a teacher at the time, and in Scotland. Scotland had only legalised homosexuality in 1980, I think it was, in Scotland, 1967 in England and Wales. So although before that people were, and friends were more open about their sexuality, it was illegal. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine what the general attitude was, and it was encouraged. But things were getting better, and in education was becoming much more progressive. We're having a difficult time under Thatcher and imposing tests and so on. So it was a lot of work. Teachers were fighting against some of the less progressive ideas, more traditional education, and there was hope in the air that we were all going to be working together, open, supporting children to be creative, to be themselves. And then, wham, Section 28. People can't speak about lesbian, gay, trans lifestyles, or support children in schools, and teachers had to. Some teachers became very scared of it, and depending on what type of school you were in, especially if it was a traditional leadership, they were happy to have that continue with that atmosphere. And it was, although we can say in Scotland it was repealed in 2000, we're still have been living with the aftermath of that, and the tone that was around it, and you can tell from the stories that are written and that we hear from children, your own experiences, that it was a very retrograde step.
Thank you, Kate. And what about you, Nicky?
I don't think I knew what it was until it was repealed in 2000. But I was aware when I was at school that we weren't allowed to talk about being different like that. But I do remember, and it's interesting. I remember the beginning of when Section 28 began. The lesbians invaded the 6 o'clock news, and I can remember exactly where I was sitting eating my dinner with my mum and dad and my brother in their house, and I was only 11 at the time, but that somehow was important, and I've remembered it. It's not because I've seen it since, but it was an important moment. And I do remember in various school lessons there were opportunities, especially in 6th year when we were doing what do you call it, personal and social education, having quite a frank and open discussion with S6 pupils and the guidance teacher about sexual behaviour. And I knew I wanted to write down, I think, the word homosexuality. We had to fill in a wee post-it note or something, then put it in a box, and then our teacher would pull it out and we'd have a discussion about those, whatever it was. And I just felt like I couldn't do that, but I didn't know why. And I don't remember being called names or anything at school because of that. It was more to do with having glasses and spots and braces, all the other usual things. But I don't know. I'd have to go and talk to some guys I was at school with who I've since learned are also LGBT. What their experience was. I don't know if they got called poof. I don't actually remember that, unfortunately. And the only things I do remember that kind of helped me come to my own conclusions about my identity were moments on TV where thinking, oh, so you don't just as a girl have to go out with boys. Oh. And there's like famously the Brookside moment and a few other TV shows that had really tiny bits of hope, and like you were saying, there was hopeful moments and things that were. I think there was a gay art teacher in Grange Hill. He was a guy, but it was something that we're showing different lives, and it meant that there was a bit of kind of. You could see something else. It wasn't just your suburban heterosexual life that was, that was kind of normal for where I grew up.
It's funny that popular culture had to pick up that issue where we weren't represented in, because we weren't represented in schools or through social care or any of the council. Entertainment, TV, music started that conversation. But I think there's already been some threads around shame, like Kate, you talking about the teachers not wanting to talk about their identity, and Nicky, you talking about feeling almost like you weren't allowed to be different and not even being able to identify what that meant. I think it was quite similar for me. So as I said, I was in school in England, and in England the Section 28 remained until 2003, and I started secondary school in 2001. And similar to you, I didn't know that it was a thing, but it could be felt. It was really heavy. So anytime anything got brought up that was related to anyone being a lesbian or gay or bisexual, it was, we can't talk about that. And I remember being bullied for similar things to you, Nicky, about my appearance, but also the word lesbian being shouted at me by girls that followed me around in the playground. I remember vividly there was me and my friend that were just walking around the playground talking to each other. We were about 11, and then there was a group of girls, maybe 5 of them, just walking behind us, maybe 10 feet behind, just shouting lesbian, lesbian, lesbian. And I was like, what's that? What does that mean? And that bullying got quite intense to where somebody tried to spit on my head. I think they might have got me, but I just pretend they didn't. People would punch me in the back when I was in queues, and I started to realise that was about me being a lesbian without fully having embraced that part of myself already. And I wonder whether it would have felt different if teachers were allowed to say, hold up a minute, this might be what's going on for you. And I think the consequences of Section 28 are still being felt today when it comes to that all of us not being able to have embraced who we were while we were going through that really difficult period of adolescence.
And for other people to understand that there were differences, that we were different. So it just closed down all that to us. And it was the same with, I was thinking of, you were talking about bullying, that there was a big anti-bullying work going on. I worked in Glasgow, and there was very good anti-racist policies. And because there was good anti-racist policies and you had to log things, it meant there was training for teachers and staff, all staff, and we were aware of that. And because there was training, because it was a policy, you talked, and I was in a primary, you were up front talking to the children about what racism was. And then for bullying, yes, we did lots of bullying, but Section 28 stopped people talking about words, lesbian, gay, which you now would probably do at primary. You might not have done it so much then. I think now you would, but certainly secondary, when children are learning about themselves and they're teenagers, and it's awful anyway for most people. And then just lockdown. No one, you can't speak about how you're feeling. The words aren't there. You're not learning the language, but also the rest of your surroundings were closed down to that. The role models that might be in there as teachers, very few.
Yeah.
Brave souls could do that, and it very much depended on what kind of establishment you were in and what the general. And I think that the bullying, not being able to tackle the bullying, yes, of course you could say you don't use those words, and that was a word that girls did use in primary 7. I'm remembering now as an insult, and possibly I tackled it slightly different from other people, but and that would be post Section 28. But these years, the establishment just got into a way of silence. It was silent, and that was not sufficient for supporting the children to be who they were, to be confident, in themselves, and the mental health issues and the health of so many young LGBT people just must have been so affected. You needed to have the support of family and friends, and that can so easily. You can be so easily be isolated.
Yeah. I think especially when you think about the absence of role models, that I think is a really important topic when it comes to teachers. I know that there was definitely teachers that I was around that were LGBT, but just couldn't talk about it, and that was even after Section 28 was repealed. They still didn't feel comfortable enough to say I am, and I always remember my nana. She was born in 1931, so this makes me chuckle rather than a criticism of my nan, but she would whisper the word lesbian, and I think that's a common thing that we all laugh about. Her down the street, she's a lesbian. And I know that anyone who does identify as a lesbian will be chuckling right now, because that is something that I think the generations above often did, because it was a derogatory term and it wasn't something that we could fully embrace. But I do wonder what would have felt different about school for those few generations if there was out LGBT people within schools.
Oh, definitely, for the confidence and the being able to be who you are, and for everyone to understand the differences, and learn about each other and embrace the differences. That just
exactly, and it just seems like there's so much missed about what literature didn't people study because it covered certain topics. Which authors did you not study? Which artists did you not look at because of the, censorship, I suppose, around these topics that we probably as LGBT plus people as adults have found, or reach for, and finding out what history is there. It's kind of everybody's own individual journey of finding like-minded and kindred spirits in the past, and I think that's why being part of OurStory Scotland is important to me. But also, I don't know how much personal social education has changed since the 90s when I was in school, but just the opportunity of talking about anything, about how you were feeling, exploring the language of emotions and feelings, didn't happen, I don't think, at all, and is only something that I think a lot of people start learning to do as an adult as well, and perhaps because we weren't able to talk about differences in emotions and feelings and approaches to life at that age, it's something that we don't get the possible, there's just not the language for, and there aren't the specialist teachers who could do that either.
Yes, it's about it was about narrowing things down. This is what is it, traditional family values.
Yeah,
people talk about for hundreds of years, thousands of years have been people of all sexualities, and so it's why do they want us just to be stereotyped into, as we've said before, the boys being scientific and technological, and the girls being pretty,
and it was,
which is very much a pressure.
I felt that definitely in my school it was, don't raise your head up in any way at all. Don't be. I unfortunately was good at sport and was the only girl that did technical drawing, so there was, I was making myself the object of possible bullying because of, I was saying, I'm doing this differently. I'm not just, doing what everybody else is doing. And I felt like...
daring to be different.
Yeah, and in the only ways that I could at the time, because that was what I was interested in. And I did feel that there was... Yeah, it did feel really narrow. I think that's a really good word, that, if you don't make a show of yourself, don't be different in any possible way, don't be good at anything.
It's what you lose from that, such a narrow outlook and lack of creativity. I feel anyway in education, we should be more open to difference and enjoying it and learning about it.
Exactly, and it's a learning experience. We're sat there learning other languages other than English, but we're not learning languages about our, how to describe ourselves.
And that's why teaching emotional intelligence is so important. I know we actually did that in school. Last school I was in, we had an emotional intelligence programme, and it was to give the children and young people the language to express themselves, and even in a conflict situation, that to explain how you're feeling, and it was quite important. I don't know. I'm hoping that they'll be using that now as adults and for their children as well.
That sounds really impressive.
I think it makes me think of how this issue that we're talking about goes beyond LGBTQ identities, and it's about, if you move outside that gendered box, then you're going to be criticised, you're going to be shamed, and you're going to be called a lesbian, or lesbian might be whispered or shouted at you, or if you're a boy, you're going to be called a puff. As soon as you move outside that box, even if you're not LGBT, the world wants you to stay inside that gendered box where you do these specific things. You don't do technical drawing if you're a girl, you don't do sport if you're a girl. I was lucky I liked art and English, so they fit the stereotype enough that I could slide by with those things. But I do now really love maths and science, but that wasn't kind of encouraged. So you're right, that when you say, Kate, that it limits creativity, it really does prevent all of us as a society from really embracing the things that we are, and instead we've got to try and fit into the things that the world wants us to be.
And even thinking really that because you can imagine, it was a long time ago, I was at school, so girls couldn't even do technical drawing if they wanted to at that point. But they think that maths and languages don't have anything to do with each other. I mean, that's just not nonsense, But for some reason, it makes it easier, perhaps. It's easier to process people through. I'm not sure why. I think Curriculum for Excellence, that's exactly what they were trying to break down, the narrow subjects. And I don't know if it's worked or not. I'm not in education at the moment, but it's certainly that's really interesting to see the at school you liked certain subjects and now you go, oh, maybe that's not bad.
Exactly.
Because I feel like that's why didn't I do physics? Why did I do botany?
Yeah.
Not even biology. Guess how many boys were in the botany class? 0.
Were there any at your school at all?
Yes.
Wow. It's unbelievable, isn't it? Thinking back to Section 28, have you got any sense of the long-term consequences of the policy?
Well, I think it took a long time. It takes people and activists to change it. Don't think the education departments suddenly said, "Oh, we must embrace inclusive education." At all. It took people working in groups like Time for Inclusive Education and Stonewall with their education packs. Time for Inclusive Education, they were campaigning and tackling prejudice with an educational approach, which was great, that somebody was willing to do all that background work. And that I know that I've read a couple of surveys that Stonewall were doing 2012. There was still the young people they surveyed who were LGBT were saying they'd been bullied by an academic paper that they did with Cambridge University in 2017. It was better, but very patchy because it depended on the establishment you were in, the school you were in, and whether there was somebody there that was championing LGBT education, inclusive education. But the outcome of that was to go to the Scottish Government, and the good thing is that a paper recently that Scotland's become the first country in the world to embed lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender inclusive education across the school curriculum. And that's just wonderful. Lots of people working together, being active, especially it was the activists, so you have to they were the ones who then getting all the authorities, the unions together, and they go to the government and say, this is what we want, this is what good inclusive education is like. And from the report, the Scottish government have accepted every detail that they've been given, and already the packs are there. But I think it's training of staff.
And I think it's knowing that there are other... I think one of the things that was very detrimental about Section 28 was that not being able to know that there are other people like you out there, and the lack of solidarity. So maybe as teachers you might have been able to find other LGBT people out and about in the world who maybe had been known to you before, and I don't know if there were ways of teachers supporting each other through Section 28 at the time. But it wasn't until I got to university and found that there was a group at the university I was at, and I thought, oh, and then having the courage to actually write an email, and then find out that all these other people were there, and it was like, oh, they're not all just a bunch of weirdos at all. It's like, well, I'm also one of those people. And I think, the solidarity of different organisations working together, and university groups that existed even in the 70s in Scotland, gay SOCs at various universities, right through the time. I don't know what that was like during the Section 28 time, but I do know that the university I was at had an LGBT group in the late 90s, so before it was repealed. And I think it's actually really interesting as well that we had in Scotland a few years ago, almost all the political party leaders were LGBT of some variety. And I do wonder, since they're probably around about my age, how much that had to do with not having any representation, and that was something that they were then aiming for in their own lives, to be that role model that they didn't have, and show leadership and show that LGBT people could do it as much as anybody else, and that you could be out there and provide that leadership. And just organisations like the Quality Network and LGBT youth who do survey, I think annually or very regularly anyway, to understand how young people are feeling. I think there's just another one being released very recently about young people's experiences of being LGBT and the bullying, and I think that's still far too high.
Yes, and it just because the government says we're going to have all state schools will have inclusive education doesn't mean the bullying's going to go away, because you've actually got to make it work, and that's what all the groups working together agitating for it to be of good quality.
And I think that opportunity to see how it changes from now that this has been introduced, and see how much teachers feel supported and how that then filters through. And also the schools who are already involved in the LGBT Youth Scotland Charter programme, and who have clubs or groups that meet already where young people feel supported. And it's not made, and it's also an opportunity for teachers and pupils who are all LGBT to talk to each other, and not for the teachers to feel frightened of feeling like they're being tarred as a sexual predator because they're hanging out with young people who also happen to be the same gender or sexuality as them. I think there's probably that fear has often been part of the problem of teachers and pupils having conversations about these things.
Yeah, I know when I was in school, it was you were trying to find your peers within school that were LGBT, but there was so much shame that it was really hard to get to the point where that person felt comfortable to share it, and it was all so kind of underground that you had to meet people secretly and that was in 2005, 2006, and I was really deeply ashamed of being LGBT, and although I had supportive friends, it was still, why are you talking about being gay so much when I finally did come out? Why do you have to talk about that? And I think you talk about boys every minute of every day. I talk about being gay every once in a while, and it's you never stop talking about it. So there's no relationship between those two things, that as a teenager you want to talk about who you fancy, but as an LGBT teenager, if you've not got LGBT people that you can be around, it's very difficult to have those conversations. And I think Section 28 had an impact on my peers when it came to my late teens, and the women, well, I would call those girls back then, who I was dating, were all deeply ashamed of being LGBT, and some of them were so ashamed that they were deeply lonely, crying, to the point where their mental health had really plummeted and were unable to share with their friends, share with their family that they were in a relationship with me, because it was just so not okay for them. And I think that is the impact of Section 28, that it led to lots of people not truly living the life that they lived, and really having to work hard to overcome that deeply ingrained homophobia that they'd internalised.
And it means for other people who aren't LGBT, they were in friendships and groups on their own, and LGBT young people felt they had to be in groups on their own. That's what, at that point, I always thought that was such so sad, because you just want everyone to be together, to be good friends together, and I hope that's changed a little bit. It was so understandable that because you're saying that it's sort of almost underground, that the people had to be secretive.
And still.
I'm going way back as well,
There's a really good television show on at the moment on Netflix called Sex Education, and our student Jade recommended it because she said that it deals with a lot of current issues, and there's two best friends who are kind of the leads, and one is a black gay man and one is a white straight man, and they're best buddies, and just I could cry watching it because of how inclusive it is for lots of gender identities, lots of sexualities, different races, ethnicities, backgrounds. It's just a huge celebration of what it means to be alive, and that is the thing that young people are seeing today. That's the thing that they're watching, and emotional intelligence is a key conversation throughout the whole of it. How do we communicate our needs in relationships? How do we seek consent? How do we talk about what's going on for us? How do we deal with ourselves when we get angry? All of those things that we also desperately need are there, present, and young people are watching it. And it's just a huge celebration of how far we've come. And I think sometimes we have to take stock of the journey that we've been on, and although Section 28 was only repealed in 2003, look at where we've got to when it comes to marriage equality. We've still got a long way to go when it comes to trans rights, but things have really changed in terms of trans rights over this period of time. It's in the conversation now.
Yes, it's been talked.
Yeah, it's been talked about. There's a movement. There's hundreds of thousands of people fighting for trans equality. And obviously there's always still going to be work to do, but we definitely need to celebrate what's been achieved.
Definitely.
So we've probably got time for one final question. So we had an interesting conversation around role models, and I know, Kate, you've got some quite good examples of the impact that Section 28 had on teachers when you were at school. Do you want to say a little about that?
About teachers who just had to deny their sexuality, and would, even in the most supportive of circumstances. One person who he just wouldn't come out to friends or at all, even after Section 28. He'd been deeply affected by by HIV/AIDS situation and the blame that was given gay men, and got it in the gutter press there, and then being a teacher, just having to deny his sexuality and his life, his private life, because of that. And that was a great price he paid, and then he terrified himself so much that it took him a very, very long time to trust people that and come out. Another friend who came into teaching later, and he'd been out, and he just embraced it and just went in for it, and got promotion and as a gay man, and that would just that would be Section 20 when it still was, and he was a great role model for us all, just to see that's the way you do it. You just go out there and you be yourself and be wonderful. You happen to be anyway. So there were different experiences, and also I was in primary schools, mainly women. I was saying to my partner the other night, I didn't work with any. I made a mistake at first and said I didn't work with any lesbians in any of the staff rooms I was in, and he said, "Oh yes, you did." You just didn't know it. And I said, "Yes, that's what I meant." And of course, and I knew there were two women head teachers in Glasgow that were, maybe I shouldn't say that, that lived together, and they were it was just everyone knew, and that was way back as well.
Yeah.
And things, and that these were good, but otherwise, it would be a primary school staff room. Then you would just be talking about your mortgage, or what the children said, or what you were going to buy.
The good thing about when
dinner.
you're in a relationship with a woman is that you can get away with being sisters or friends when you need to be. So if you go to somewhere where it's not okay, you can just be like, "Oh, this is just my pal." And I know that for a lot of people would, because we've got this. I'm married to my wife. I got married in 2016, so we've got the same last name. So we can very easily get away with being sisters if we go somewhere to check into a hotel and they're not quite okay with us being together. And we often get, "Oh, do you know that you've booked a double bed?" Yes, I do know that. I do know. Thank you. It's just, me and my sister. We just like to be close. Oh, yeah. And there's lots of funny stories about our wedding where they thought that my husband had very, very tiny fingers when I ordered the rings. They just couldn't even click that it might be a woman because we had the same size ring finger. So she thought, I like the idea that she was left really puzzled thinking about this tiny, tiny man that I was going to marry. So it's those types of things that now, and I think that one of the things that feels really important to me is that people do try to understand LGBT lives. And now when we talk about lesbians being angry or trans people being angry, I think, well, yeah, I was very angry when I was young because I was bullied quite profoundly for who I was, which meant I became defensive, I became hostile, I wanted to protect myself. Yeah. I built a hard shell around me, so when anyone tried to get in or anyone said anything critical, I was straight down their throat. No, don't say that. I would attack to protect myself. And that's what any minority often does if they can't be accepted for who they are in society. So it's just a pause for thought for people who might think that different minority groups are angry people. But think about why they might be angry, why might they be feeling angry. And it takes time to get to the point where you can really get settled into who you are, and you can laugh when somebody asks, what's the groom's name that we can put on the tuxedo? And it's like, we don't have a groom. Yeah, but we have to put the groom's name. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I'm telling you there isn't a groom, so you're going to have to put a different name. Well, whose last name should we put? You pick. We've got 2, Wilson-Scott. You pick the name that you'd like. And those types of scenarios make me and Charlotte laugh now. It's not something that we become defensive about. We walk away just having a good chuckle. But it's really hard to get to there because when you've experienced that level of trauma, you really need to take time to recover.
And you have to remember people in other areas of the world too are not a laughing stage yet, and we need to be supportive of that.
It's interesting you were saying about, I from what you were saying earlier, Kate, about the impact of on LGBT people, especially the gay men and other men who slept with men, of the HIV epidemic in the 80s particularly. And there was then that curtain came down on any discussion about lives. And, did those people have any time to process what had happened to them, where many of their close friends and partners and whoever had died really in horrible circumstances? And, that was then all sort of shoved under the carpet and not talked about. And I just wonder what impact that has had on men's mental health from that generation. I just feel like Section 28 for me personally, and I've had other people confirm that they feel similarly who are in similar age, that it was hard to find other women like us who are older because that connection had been lost because of Section 28. There wasn't an opportunity to meet people except maybe going to a nightclub, and then that's not the best place to get to know people in a sort of on a political or sort of friendship level. You need other spaces to do that, and that's why it's good that there were LGBT centres and organisations, although there are not so many now. And that, when I lived elsewhere, I got involved with volunteering at an LGBT centre, and that really was formative and really important for my life.
Yeah,
we talked about a lot of these, internalised homophobia and politics and getting your voice out there and protesting
and there's always that conversation of, well, why do we need our own spaces? And that's the reason, just so that we can have those conversations that are uniquely LGBT, because internalised homophobia I didn't learn about until about 3 years ago. And now it's common language that young LGBT people use, and internalised transphobia, and, there's a whole conversation to be had there.
And also people who are LGBT and a person of colour or also disabled or also working class, finding spaces where they can be their whole selves and not have to prioritise and one ahead of the other and just be their whole self. And I think that's something that is something that we're continuing to have to work on now, so that people can be their whole selves. And I think that sort of self-realisation and being your best self, like you were saying about your colleague who was just out there and embracing life, that's what we should want for everybody, not this kind of squishing people into boxes and repressing everybody, because that just makes us all unhappy.
And I think that's what we're trying to do at Kairos, and enabling people to be their whole selves. And although Kairos isn't an LGBTQ organisation, we are very LGBTQ inclusive, and I think it's really important for people like you, Nicky, and people like myself to be able to be open about who we are and say, it's okay to be you. And if ever there was a person that was unsure about their sexuality, I often have mums coming up to me and saying, my daughter's thinking that she might be bisexual or lesbian, what do I do? Like, just be kind, just listen to her, do the things that you do anyway.
But that's brilliant that they're coming to you and seeking out support and asking those questions, and that they're not embarrassed to ask those questions as a parent. That's brilliant. Yeah,
and I think there's all that conversation that you could go on about for a long time about assimilation. Is it okay for LGBT people to try and assimilate and fit into the heterosexual world? And that I've had some criticism for being married because it's not seen as it's seen as an institution that is patriarchal and all of that sort of thing. But we all make our individual choices, and I think conversations like today's, where we're able to reflect on the different impact, like Kate in education and Nicky, who was in school in Scotland, and me in England, and how we've all got different perspectives, but we can come together and sometimes disagree, but still raise awareness of important issues. So I'm very grateful that you joined us for this conversation today. And I think to end on a high, we'll just remind you that we are moving forward in Scotland when it comes to equality in schools, and we're going to keep an eye on how things progress and hope that our movement keeps going strong. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks to the success of Time for Inclusive Education, as mentioned earlier by Kate, schools in Scotland will now include LGBTQ+ content in the curriculum. Here with us we have a poem from the TIE Teacher Pack. It was published in the 16th century as part of a wider collection of poems collated to celebrate Sir Richard Maitland of East Lothian. The remarkable thing about this, though, is that the poem is anonymous. Experts believe that it might have been penned by Sir Richard's daughter, Mary Maitland, who had been assisting him as his literary secretary. Written in Scots when writing and publishing was dominated by men, it is one of the earliest surviving instances of lesbian poetry in Renaissance Europe in any language. It is known simply as Poem 49, and I'm going to share a couple of verses with you as in Scots as well as the English translation. And as by hidden virtue unknown, the adamant draws iron thereto, your courteous nature so has drawn my heart yours to continue still. So great joy does my spirit fulfill, contemplating your perfection. You govern me wholly at your will, and ravish my affection. Your peerless virtue does provoke, and loving kindness so does move my mind to friendship reciprocated, that truth shall prove so far above, that ancient heroes love as shall be thought prodigious, and plain experience shall prove more holy and religious. Yea, certainly we should efface Pollux and Castor's memory, and if that they deserved place among the stars for loyalty, then our more perfect amity more worthy recompense should merit, in heaven eternal deity among the gods to inherit. Thank you so much for listening. We've been a brew and a blether, a Kairos Women plus community produced podcast. If you like what you've heard, you can follow us on social media, all the usual places, or you can look at our website, kairoswomen.org, and I'll spell that out for you. It's KAIROSWOMEN. If you have any questions or comments on the series, we would love to hear from you. Please get in touch.
This series was made possible through the Great Play Scheme, a project funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund and delivered through Renfrewshire Council. The music you've heard is by Lakbay Lahi, the song Pag-ibig, which means love in Filipino. Love is central to our ethos at Kairos, and a lot of love and volunteer time goes into all of our projects. Thanks to the guests and volunteers who give their time to make this podcast happen.